So I'm now at a point where I have more diagnoses than I do days of the week. I thought it was well overdue time for me to start going through my list of conditions, chat to you about them, just to bring you up to date more than anything. And I thought I'd pop my makeup on while I do that. Ignore my hair, I'm trying out the curly girl method on my newly cut hair. So yes, you did hear me right. I do have more conditions than I do days of the week, which is absolutely insane to me. They've been diagnosed over a very, very long period of time, and there was a big gap where nothing was getting diagnosed and I was just feeling completely stuck. But in the last year or so, I've had more diagnoses than I ever thought was possible. In fact, during the first week of the year, I actually had a new diagnosis every single day for the first 5 days. We're at a point that when I enter the hospital and I get asked what I have wrong with me, I don't actually know off the top of my head because there are so many different conditions, some of which cause memory loss, which is an irony. So I have to now consult the list that I have on my phone, which is what I'm going to go through today. Please note, they're not in any particular order. So the first condition that I have that I was diagnosed with when I was 14 is fibromyalgia, which is a bit of a rotten diagnosis because it doesn't really tell you anything. There's no treatment and basically nothing happens. Once they diagnose it, they kind of just tell you to go home, take pain relief and see what happens. The other diagnosis that I have was from when I was very small, which is ME. Now some people might argue that maybe my other conditions are very similar to ME or have side effects that are very similar, so maybe I don't have this so much anymore. But for me it was the condition that started everything, and I do still feel like ME is a big part of my life, and I definitely get the fatigue from it, so that's another big contender. I believe I was the youngest person to ever be diagnosed with ME at just 2 years old. The next condition is autism, so I have always been very, very autistic, and this was picked up on at school age, so I have that, and it is something that I find I get affected by every single day, particularly when it comes to trying to read emotions, be friends with people, or maintain relationships. Again, like I said, in no particular order, I also have ulcerative colitis. So this was one of the major diagnoses that kicked off the last spate of diagnoses that I've had. And this was obviously the one that led to me having my bowel surgery. Ulcerative colitis is horrible. I wouldn't wish it on anyone ever. It is the most horrible thing. But it is what it is. It's been an absolutely major part of my last sort of 5 years of my life. And to be honest, I was so relieved to get my stomach issues finally addressed, because prior to that, it had just been blamed on being very flexible. Speaking of being very flexible, I also have hypermobile EDS. So that's when I don't have enough collagen and everything is too hyperflexible due to being hypermobile. So that's a bit of a pain and has meant that my whole life I've had to use braces and walking aids. I've had a wheelchair since I was a very small child, and I've always had joint dislocations and subluxes, although this has been made more difficult through one of my more recent diagnoses, that being of arthritis. More specifically, they thought entropathic arthritis, although the hospital is now debating whether that's the type that I have. So due to being on steroids for so long, both to help manage the ulcerative colitis when I wasn't receiving appropriate treatment, and then to manage the arthritis, I have developed osteopenia. For anyone who doesn't know, osteopenia is the precursor to osteoporosis. So at my last DEXA scan, my bone mass was down, which means that I'm on my way to osteoporosis, which I would really like to avoid if possible, and need to come off the steroids as soon as possible. Unfortunately, I've been left on steroids for far, far longer than I should have been, and this has led to me actually starting a medical negligence claim, which I obviously can't talk too much about because it's got to go through the official channels, but let's just say there's been some very weird things happen and some things that definitely shouldn't have. Off the back of that, I lost my hearing a few years ago, and I thought it was just me. To be honest, for the longest time I just thought that my ears were congested and that, you know, it would be fine, it would come back eventually. But after a couple of years, I figured it probably wouldn't. So I went to see audiology and I was diagnosed with hearing loss, completely without reason. Nobody can work out why I've lost my hearing, and nobody can work out why it keeps getting worse. But I've lost 30% of my hearing in both sides of my head. So inflammation seems to be my best friend at this point, and there hasn't been a single test done within the last 3 years where my inflammation hasn't been sky high, and that includes with my eyes. So I have a condition called uveitis, which is inflammation behind my eyes. Very, very common for people with IBD, very, very common for people with arthritis, very, very common when your condition's not in check, made worse when you come off of steroids. So that's fun. Speaking of steroids, I also have another condition that's been triggered off by that, which is Cushing's syndrome. So because I've been left on steroids altogether too long, I have developed this issue with my cortisol levels where I basically put weight on in the wrong places and my body is trying to conserve what it can. So I am a lot bigger of a girl than I was even a year ago, and it's pretty scary. There's not much they can do for it, and if they don't catch it quickly, which in my case they haven't, it can lead to permanent adrenal insufficiency. So I'm not exactly sure what the next few years are going to hold with this, but Cushing syndrome. Now, allergies. Allergies I could write a book on, but I have chronic spontaneous urticaria, which is literally such a pain. It can cause random anaphylactic reactions, random hives, random little reactions, like just allergic reactions left, right and centre, and it can be to something that you weren't allergic to the day before or the hour before. So for example, water, rain, a food that you've had before, a place that you've been, the sun, literally anything can cause a random reaction. It's super scary, super dangerous, really awkward when it comes to medication. It means that wherever I go I have to carry an EpiPen with me, because you just never know when I'm going to have a reaction. Another diagnosis that I have is something called dyscalculia, which is like dyslexia, but of numbers rather than letters. I've had this all my life, but it didn't get diagnosed until quite late. Then I also have some more recent diagnoses that have only come about in the last couple of months. So again, we're going to go back to inflammation. Told you this list was in a random order. I have something called myocarditis, which is inflammation of the muscle in your heart. Again, usually linked to things not being controlled very well and autoimmune issues. And it's really dangerous. It's not at all good for you, but it's something that they're trying to keep in check. But until I get my arthritis properly under management, it's going to be difficult to do that. And then finally, on my list of diagnoses for the moment, I also have dysautonomia. For anyone who knows about dysautonomia, you'll know that there are so many different types. And as of yet, they haven't decided which type I have. I have thought for a long while that I probably have POTS, and they are going to look into that at some point. But at the moment, they're having to pursue other tests above looking for the POTS. Because on the list of sort of dangerous diagnoses, this one is not very high. However, I am on medication for some of my heart-related issues. Can we all just take a moment for this new palette from Colourpop? I am obsessed with it and I absolutely love it. It's got the prettiest colours ever in it, so much fun. So another worthwhile contender on my list of diagnoses, although I haven't actually been diagnosed with this one as of yet, is that I had a brain MRI to look for neurological issues. So they did a brain scan and they found that I have brain lesions. Unfortunately, though, they didn't follow this up in any way. They discharged me, which I don't feel was the appropriate course of action. So I am trying to get that revisited and get somebody to take a look at what's actually going on with my brain. But as of yet, I don't have a diagnosis to explain where the brain lesions have come from, just that they're there and clearly not helping anything. I also have other investigations going on because through looking for one thing, they accidentally find another. And very recently, they realised that I have a patch of something on my lung. They're not exactly sure what, but it seems to be getting bigger. And as a result, they have booked me an emergency CT scan so they could check it out and make sure that there's nothing that should be worried about. So I have that booked in next week, and who knows what's going to come off the back of that, because if there's one thing that I've learned about my body, it's that it loves to throw boomerangs. Every time I don't expect it, something new pops out the woodwork. So yeah, that's my current conditions. It's a very long list. It is very complex, and you can imagine when you then cross over all the medications with that, trying to explain your medical history to the doctor every time you go to the emergency department or every time you start with a new department is exhausting, and that is years and years and years of medical history that's just compacted together, and usually I still end up forgetting something, so I have no doubt I've forgotten something today. But I just thought it would be nice to share that with everyone so that you had a bit of an idea of who I was and where I come from and what it is that I'm talking about, and why I think I'm fairly well qualified to say that I'm a chronically ill person, and that I have a little bit of knowledge in that department. So yeah, if you have any questions about my conditions, about things that I do to help them, how I manage with them, how I don't manage with them, please ask me, because I am a very open book and I would always rather have chats with people and let them know that they're not alone than ever know that somebody felt like they didn't have anybody to turn to. So yeah. And for anyone who's wondering or didn't manage to keep count, that list makes a total of 14 different diagnoses across, I think I worked out it was 9 different hospitals that I'm being seen at, and I'm on about 14 different medications each day. So yeah, there's a lot to try and manage, and medical admin is a whole separate video because trying to synchronise all those departments, trying to make sure that I have all of the necessary medications, supplies, stoma supplies, etc. is a never-ending day-to-day job. I don't think you ever fully comprehend just how much time it takes. Just in case you were here for the makeup, here's how the final look has come along. I absolutely love this eyeshadow. I am obsessed with it.